Hey guys, we are going to look at another type of fiscal policy. This fiscal policy really took place during the Reagan administration. It's called supply side. Many of y'all know it as Reaganomics. Um, when we looked at fiscal policy yesterday, we know that fiscal policy can only solve one problem at one time. If we're doing contractionary, it's in solving the inflation issue. If we're doing expansionary, it's resolving the issue of unemployment. Well, in the 1970s, y'all saw this in US history, that we had two problems at the same time. We had high unemployment and high inflation, which is called stagflation. And so the Carter administration and the Ford administration really suffered with resolving the issues because when we used the Keynesian model, it could only solve for one problem at one time. And so what we're going to look at is supply side, saying instead of moving the aggregate demand curve, let's look at moving the aggregate supply curve. And so the goal of supply side is to increase aggregate supply by giving firms incentives to produce. And so there's three tools to increasing aggregate supply. One of them is cutting taxes. If we cut taxes, consumers save money, they have money in their pockets, there's more money going into the bank, so banks have more money to borrow. Thus, they could increase their aggregate supply. Their real GDP will increase as well. If the government spends less, we're going to see that this allows for more money to be in the banks. It's called the crowding in effect. That allows for businesses to collect that money. And now there's more money available, they can increase their production. And if we deregulate businesses, that means we remove some of those rules that have been preventing businesses from being efficient. So such as one of the rules that we know that has occurred is that there's no child labor. Well, if that was deregulated and they allow child labor, the cost of production decreases and we will see the aggregate supply will increase. So these are the three tools. And a lot of it is reducing the government's role, reducing their role in taxing us, reducing their spending, and reducing their regulation of our economy. And so what we saw, sorry y'all, I'm going to see the top of this graph, let me fix that, is that the Keynesian model moved the aggregate demand curve. Well, if the government is taxing less, that means that people have more money, right? There's more money in the banks. Businesses can borrow that money. And so this aggregate supply curve will move to the right, which increases real GDP. If the government taxes business less, that allows for them to have more money available, increasing the aggregate supply curve. If there is more deregulation, less rules on them, they could spend more because they're not having to enforce those regulations. And so that curve moves to the right. Looking at this, when that curve moves to the right, the price level goes down, output goes up. This is the positive thing with supply side, that we always want to see more output, real GDP increasing. But with aggregate demand moving to the right, that increases the price. Here, when you move the aggregate supply curve, price remains low, and this is a benefit. Okay? Quantity of output, more people are working, unemployment is down, prices are low. Okay, inflation. So supply side fiscal policy basically stalls stagflation. So this all comes from economists saying that aggregate supply increases, more people are working, and supply will create its own demand. So if we increase production, aggregate supply, more workers are hired, they have money in their pockets, unemployment rates decreases, people have more money in their pockets, they have more money to spend, causing aggregate demand to go up, causing more production. Supply creates its own demand. Okay, so there's limitations of supply side. Consumers don't always act as we predicted, right? Some of them don't save their money and it doesn't go into the bank, so the banks can't lend that out. This basically works on trickle down, that we're saying that we're going to benefit the rich businesses, and eventually by giving them those tax cuts, they would reinvest in their businesses. That means that production will go up. And we were going to see that oftentimes it doesn't trickle down and get to the poor. We saw this in the 1920s. our budgets don't balance because the government has decided to tax less. And sometimes they don't collect the money that they need to for its increased fiscal policy and defense spending or other items. Lastly, the deregulation of businesses sometimes go too far. Banks become to make risky loans. More mergers occur. Okay, so this is the supply side. It's that easy.